meeting, Sioux Falls City Council informational meeting, Tuesday, May 3rd, to order. First item on our agenda today is audit committee report for Thursday, April 28th. Yes, you do.
You're going too quick for me here. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we met on this, April 28th. Full committee was there. And we agreed, or we had reports on 3 different audits that were done, one on landfill cash controls, construction contracts, and then a follow-up on audit recommendations. As you know, Rich and his group, Rich Oaksville and his group try to follow up on all the audit recommendations that they make after a certain number of time, certain period of time, to make sure that they have been followed and that they're implemented. And so that's very good that we do that. We really didn't have a lot of open discussion, other than we did reappoint Arnie Martins to another 3-year term on the committee, and so he's a representative from the citizen at large. So that's the report.
Okay. Any questions for Councilman Rolfing? Seeing none, we'll move on to City Council open discussion. Items for open discussion. Councilman Karski.
Thank you, Council Chair. I want to make the Council aware of something that I had discovered a few weeks ago. Basically, I asked our budget analyst for some information about funding for the Sioux Falls Development Foundation, and I really couldn't honestly tell you where the impetus for that came from, other than I just wanted to do some checking. For many years, the city has had a very good working relationship with the Sioux Falls Development Foundation. And the Development Foundation, just as you're probably aware, is a not-for-profit organization that was formed pretty much for the purpose of large-scale developments, business recruitment, workforce development, and basically tasks that no one entity or private enterprise has the resources or the wherewithal to do. And we've very much through our budgeting process, the council has supported them. Back to 2011, I was able to find where we had given them significant money. In 2012, 2013, 2014, and 2015, so for the last 4 years, we had budgeted for $275,000 to go to the Development Foundation. And by the agreement, $175,000 was for payment for services and tasks, and another $100,000 was payment for a special projects fund. The Development Foundation basically uses that money. It's their way of being able to do what their job is to do, okay? And we have paid that money every year to them, except for in 2015, it was decided that $100,000 of that money was discretionary, and that the city would retain that money and return it to the general fund, according to an email I have. That troubles me, because the city council appropriated that money for the purpose of the Development Foundation, and it wasn't given to them, and it was returned with no notice to us that to the general fund. I personally see it almost as a reneging of our contract that we have with the Development Foundation, and I would like to hear from community development or whoever is in charge of this money. I believe it's community development, why it was decided and for what reason, according to the contractual terms, that we did not to pay that money. And I wanted to do that here because it is the council that appropriated that money, and I think it's important that we all be aware of that. So next week would be fine if somebody from community development would like to address that. I would just like to hear why we did not give that $100,000. And I think it should be done publicly, because it is the taxpayers' dollars.
Any questions? Councilor Offenbach?
Councilor Karski, did you have a conversation with the Development Foundation about the cash? Was there some sort of agreement that maybe they didn't need the extra? I mean, is there a backstory to this?
I did talk to the Development Foundation, yes, several times actually. They were at a loss. I asked, did you not receive this? And they said, no, we always have in the past. We were just told it was discretionary. we just lived with it. Basically, they're not going to raise a fuss about not getting money, I guess, in my perception of it. Would you bite the hand that feeds you to that point? Would they have use for the money? You have to understand that the Development Foundation and the city have worked hand in hand for many years, is the conversation or the way I had it explained to me, that if the Development Foundation needed to use some of that special projects money, they would go to the city and say, hey, we're going to use it for this. We got this company coming here and we need to incent them by maybe buying a piece of equipment that they need in order to start operations. And it worked the same way. The city might go to the Development Foundation, so we got this pot of cash, we'd like to use this money because for economic development, workforce development, whatever, and they work together as a team on this type of projects.
So, if I might, Mr. Chair, if you talk to the Development Foundation about their side of the contract, did you talk then to the administration about their side of the issue? Do we have any sort of story at all about what the decision was?
No, that's what I'd like to know.
With that, I'd like to ask Tom Huber to step up. I did hear about this earlier this afternoon. I got a call from the Argus leader about this. So I did call the Development Foundation. I spoke with Slater, and then I contacted Finance and spoke with Tom about this also. So I'd like you to give us a little explanation,
Council
if you
Chair,
would,
if
Tom.
I could just,
Sure.
I've provided copies of everybody with the contract and the spending over the years with the Development Foundation. So you do have the contract in front of you. I've read it. I guess I'm not an attorney, but I've read contracts before, and the way I read the contract, the word may is used an awful lot in the contract. And to me, it's more of the council should probably have been made aware that money that we set aside was not used for what we had intended it to be used for an agreement that we have.
Well, and that's why I would like Mr. Huber to explain that, if you would, please, sir.
Sure. I pulled the contract, and we did talk about this at the very end of the year. You're right, we do budget $275,000 annually for the Sioux Falls Development Foundation, divided into those two distinct categories. The one is more $175,000 for the ongoing support of the organization for development and business recruitment activities, and is paid in a lump sum during the year. The other $100,000 is budgeted and clearly delineated in the agreement, as Councilor Karski mentioned, as the up to $100,000 and is on a more discretionary funding basis on a case-by-case basis depending upon the needs. And so on December 31st of 2015, the last day of the year, the request came in for the additional $100,000. That's when we in Finance received the request that had been made of economic development. And so to pull the additional $100,000 in funding. And as the agreement states, there was already $125,000 over at the Development Foundation from previous years. It's my understanding that some of that had been spent, but that a great majority of it, over $90,000, was still remaining as a balance at the end of the year. And so, as the agreement states, it says the foundation, the agreement, the unspent 2014 funds of $125,000 may be utilized before additional funds are being made available. And it further goes on to talk about the city anticipates the foundation may not fully expend the monies, may decide to reduce the amount of their request payment by the city to offset their obligation to return any unexpended funds. So given that there was a significant amount of funds sitting at the foundation already, they didn't identify any projects clearly to the additional $100,000, and there is another $100,000 budgeted in 2016 of those project-by-project funds. It was decided to say, this is a last minute request. We don't really have any backdrop for sending the additional monies over there, so we would hold. And again, if there are more projects that need to be funded or there are additional funds, we can always come back and, even in addition to the $100,000 that's budgeted in 16, supplement based upon the fact that they didn't spend all of the 2015 funds. So again, there was a significant balance already in their accounts over there of city money. So it was decided between economic development and finance that we just didn't have justification to send additional monies at the time.
Councilor Erickson?
what was the dialogue back and forth then? Was it,
It was all,
we want to have $100,000, send us the rest of the money, and the city said, no, thank you? Or what was the dialogue? Did they have the opportunity to then say that $100,000 is going to be used for Project X, Project Y, Project Z, and that's what it's, I mean, clearly not too long ago, we were talking about having this extra car rental tax put on. So clearly there's a need. They have needs to raise funds, and the development, the Foundation Park has needs. There's clearly got to be something that they needed to expend it for. So I'm just curious on how the conversation went of, here's the request, it was done by email, and a no thank you email was sent, or what was the conversation?
I can't speak to the dialogue between Economic Development and the Development Foundation. They're the primary contact with the foundation. It was just, we got a request from Economic Development on December 31st of this year to say they would like to put in for the extra 100,000, but they didn't have any projects behind it. So that was the request of finance.
Okay. And
So
thank
again,
you.
it would be, we would have been sending extra money over there without a lot of information from a financial perspective by which to send additional money when there was already money sitting there.
So do they have to can I have
Continue,
two
please.
small follow-ups? Do they need to justify at any point what they're spending it on, and do they report to you or to community development?
Community Development, Economic Development is the one that receives the justification and approves the justification as clearly outlined in the agreement. So they are the ones that actually have to approve the use of the money for projects.
Okay,
the
thank you.
city
And
does.
I would just follow up with some of the comments that Councilor Karski made. I appreciate you being here and clarifying some of that conversation that took place, but I think it's so important to have community development here as well to share what that dialogue is. If a request was made for $100,000 that clearly states that's kind of what we've expected over the years, and if a no thank you email was sent, I don't know. But if that's what happened, or if there was a dialogue back and forth of, we want to spend it for water treatment. I mean, there's great needs going on there. And so I'd just like to have them come, if it's next week, to have them just explain the conversation that took place between the two, and maybe even have Development Foundation here as well, just to maybe address some of those questions, just to kind of find out what happened. I just think it's unfortunate if we are saying, and the council votes and says this is what we plan on spending it, that we do follow that, but get more information.
Councilor Rolfing.
Tom, the way I understand is that in 2012, 13, and 14, the money was forwarded to the Development Foundation in a full $100,000 increments. Is that correct?
I didn't look back at that. I can't refute one way or the other.
That's what happened. And it appears to me that they have not used all that. They've still got about, well, right now about $91,000 of that in the account.
Right, I believe the balances kept building, or
Right,
had
kept
built to
building.
that point that it reached a full year's worth of dollars.
Almost.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering why the decision was made that in 2015, they weren't going to be, that this money wouldn't be forwarded to them like it had been in the past, and that it would be withheld, because $100,000, as I remember voting on it, it wasn't just for that year. It could be expanded to where if they let it ride for 3 or 4 years without being used, that they would have a little bigger fund to make some initiatives. Is that the way you understand it, or don't you remember?
I think and I wasn't in all of the conversations, and I can tell you, when we went back to Economic Development, what to say, is there justification for these problems, for these monies? There's a full year's worth of funding sitting there already. We don't want to get caught in a position where we're just sending money, taxpayers' money, to an entity that's not being put to immediate and good use. And so, again, there was a full year's worth of money there. There wasn't any projects justified, and we can always come back and restore the funding in a future year if we needed to. As December 31st, and you make the decision with what information you have available at the time, and that we didn't have any project to justify, and possibly accused the other way around of saying you're sending money over there and you don't have justification for the project.
So in other words, if they need the money tomorrow, they can get it.
Well, there's $100,000 in 2016 that's appropriated for them. So they do have another $100,000 in 16, in addition to what they're carrying, and then it's...
And another 100,000 from 15.
that we could put back. You'd have to amend it by supplemental appropriation, but it can be amended back in if it's if they prove that it's absolutely necessary. You know,
Just wanted to make that
we
point.
can come back and, you know, you can always appropriate the additional funds.
Councilor Kiley.
Just a point of clarification, December 31st is the last day of the contract period? Was it a calendar year or fiscal year?
For that contract period, I think this contract extends, to find the specific date on it, but yeah, December 31st is the last.
December 31st.
Last day.
The request came in at the 11th hour, and to your knowledge, no justification for use of the funding.
Right, we requested and said, what is their justification behind this? And
So in a sense, it's kind of a lose it or use it scenario, but in this case, they really didn't lose what they had because they have a balance of 90,000 or so previously. It's just that additional money wasn't going to be forwarded until they had the justification for the need of up to $190,000.
And the city has the right to go back and get the leftover monies back from the foundation. So, you know, we could have went the other way and give them the 100,000 and, you know, clawed back the 91,000 or whatever was left over. Again, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to go back and forth.
Previous years, the $100,000, was it just an automatic transfer from city to the Development Foundation, or was it based on a specific request from the Development Foundation for that $100,000?
Well, I would guess they would have requested certain projects that they were looking at to economic development in order for us to send the money over in the first place, but obviously they built up the balances over time, so the request would have fallen short of what funding was actually sent.
Okay.
So.
Thank you.
Councilman Jameson.
Thanks. Tom, we haven't seen you in a while. It's good to have you
been a
here.
Good to be back.
Right in the hot seat. So, did I hear you right say that there was an identified project by economic development for $100,000, and that's why it was deferred to keep it here versus sending it over there? Did I hear you say that?
No. Come again with the question, please.
So I just thought I'd heard you say one of the reasons that the 100,000 wasn't sent was because they didn't have an identified project, but our own economic development had an identified project that needed. Okay.
No, that money would have been turned back to the fund balance, so that would have went into the reserve. And I don't believe that money was spent anywhere else. That would have just been turned back money. So it would have went unspent at the end of the year and would add to your fund balance.
If I could, I don't have any more questions for Tom, but it does probably, somehow it seems like it ties into the Sioux Falls has jobs.com part. It doesn't fall into that?
Does not.
Well, okay, that's what I was thinking when I heard it, and it seems like the timelines are the same. But what it does spur up in this whole conversation is with the changing of directors, Darren Smith leaving economic development, that I'm wondering if it's a good idea is now is the time to maybe move economic development into planning and take the management of those TIFs and the facade easement, put that into planning, consolidate the services that we've already got going with the Development Foundation. We're talking about these contracts and this funding. It's a great opportunity to consolidate, and I think some of this discussion has probably started some of those wheels turning. Public parking could be done in some other fashion, but I think there's an opportunity right now, and it's right at our. I don't know who's ultimately in control of that, but I think this is a great conversation to have.
Any other questions? Councilor Karski.
Just have one more comment. If you read the second page of the contract, and I just want you to take time to do it, because I really would like community development here next week, and you read the intent or the way that's written, I'm reading it, this is supposed to be a ongoing working relationship with the Sioux Falls Development Foundation using the special projects fund, and truly a partnership with the city. And when I heard that happened, and I did ask about the money, and like I said, the reaction I got from the Development Foundation wasn't one of anger or anything like that, but when I read the agreement, I'm thinking, well, it doesn't seem like we have much of a partnership. When I read this, it was talked about this being a discretionary fund. The word discretion is used once in here, and it's not that it's a discretionary fund, and the word may is used most often, not meaning shall or has to, but if the Development Foundation has used for money in the Special Projects Fund, I would hope that I'm going to hear that the conversation was we talked to them and it was agreed mutually that this money wasn't going to be paid, not just unilaterally. And that's what I would like to find out and to hear. So, thank you.
Let me briefly comment to that. From a finance perspective, there's certainly no intent. We have a good working relationship with the Development Foundation, and we'd want to continue that relationship. It's a partnership, but we also have an accountability for the taxpayers' dollars. And so again, from our perspective, how the agreement was written, it was about accountability for those dollars.
And my reply to that, Tom, would be this: the council is the one that appropriates the money and has that accountability back to the taxpayers. So that's why I think that we should have been probably made aware that this wasn't going to happen. So.
Tom, and I'd like to weigh in on this now too. Today, after I found out about this issue, I contacted Slater Barr and had a very good conversation with him. This is a discretionary fund. The fund is, the spending of the fund is decided by the Development Foundation and the Community Foundation, Economic Darren's department. So basically, they've got about between $91,000 and $92,000 right now in that fund. They do not have any specific projects to spend that money on at this time. When I asked Slater if he needed that money right now, he said no, he did not, and that it wasn't something that was life or death for the Development Foundation, and it is something that they are continually working with the city on. Basically, per the contract, I think that the city has been frugal on making sure that there wasn't a large sum of money, or larger than what is now there, just sitting waiting for something to happen. If there is money needed, they can request that money, and just as our finance people have told us, that it can be allocated by the city council. So that's pretty much what I learned about it, and that the Development Foundation is not asking for this money. Right now, they feel that they can move forward, and if there's an opportunity, they will, at that point in time, request it. Councilor Erpenbach?
I would respectfully disagree. They did ask for it. They asked for it at the end of December in 2015, and they asked for it in the budget request that we approved as a council. While I don't necessarily agree with the way that this has been handled, this conversation, I do agree with Councilor Karski that council should have been made aware of this. This was a sum of money that we've talked about year after year in terms of we want to show our commitment to the Development Foundation and to that sort of discretionary fund that, we don't necessarily have control over that cash. And we have said year after year, voted yes for this money year after year. To have it not paid to the foundation, whether they need it right this minute or not, to have it not paid to the foundation is a lack of partnership with us as a council. And I think that at the minimum, the administration should have said, you know what, they don't need it right now. Just want to let you know as council members, we're not forking it over right now. We've still got it in case they need it, but just should have been a conversation. That's all that I'm asking for at this point.
Councilor Rolfing?
I would respectfully disagree with my colleague on the right, indicating that when there is almost a year's balance in there and projects need to be looked at before they are approved to be spent there, I think the finance department is doing a good job of safeguarding our money. As I asked Tom, can they get the money anytime they have a project, anytime they need it? Yes was his answer. It wasn't like we're holding it back and you'll never get it. It's just that why should it sit over there when it could sit here earning a little bit more interest maybe, and available at any time that's needed. So I'm just gonna disagree with my friend to the right.
Councilor Kiley?
Well, I guess what raises a red flag for me is the delay in the request, December 31st, the very last day of the contract period, and then not really having a specific need. I guess I would be reluctant to allocate that money without any designated purpose, especially at that late. So I would encourage the Development Foundation to get all their ducks in a row and be prepared when they make such a request. But I would hope that if that request does come in at a later date now, that we are prepared to fund the project as requested.
Any other conversation on this point? Seeing none, we will move on to our presentations, or do we have any other open discussion points? Councilman Jameson.
Thank you. I was wondering if the council would consider the idea of taking items 49 and 50 for tonight's agenda and sending them back to a committee to review those items. We've got 7 amendments in item 50. I've got 1 amendment for 49. I just feel like those 2 items are pretty significant, and I was confused before about why they didn't go through a committee when we've had an open calendar. I mean, our calendar's been free, and I don't know, but if I'm missing something on a deadline or timeline, tell me so that I don't cause a problem. But I'm really after a vetted process here, and I just feel that we've gotten pushback, I know, from some on item 50. I'm giving lots of pushback on parts of item 49, and I know I won't participate in those committees, but I really think long-term it's really the right process. And I'm just wondering if the council would consider either deferring them or doing something so that we can get them into a committee. But I would yield to the council on that wish.
Councilor Rolfing?
Keith, can you give us any guidance on this, or is this not part of your repertoire? That was a big word I used there, everybody.
Councilor Rolfing?
Oh, it's clean here?
Yes, right to your
Oh,
right.
okay, clean. I'm sorry. Would you like to visit us with us about that?
That peripheral vision thing.
Good afternoon, Colleen Moran with the City Attorney's Office. And Councilor Jameson, can I answer some questions for you?
The real question is whether would we be causing you a problem if we deferred these back to a committee so that they can vet all of those changes and get input from others who are impacted. And it would probably take, I would tell you, an easy month of delay, maybe more. But we can handle it and take care of the business tonight. But there's 7 amendments on one item alone, and I've got an amendment myself on one other item, item 49. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one, but I don't want to cause a problem, but I just want it to be vetted, and if that delay would cause a major problem, then I need to know.
There aren't any deadlines, set deadlines that we need to follow.
Okay. I think that's what Councilor Rolfing was asking.
Yeah.
Colleen, I do have a question.
Sure.
What are the issues that we're seeing right now? You and I have had a couple discussions. I know you've met with Multi-Housing Association. What's the issues that you're seeing on these amendments?
Well, there are a couple. When we, after I met with the Multi-Housing Association, there were some changes, and that was the cause of some of those amendments. A couple of them are just housekeeping, where unfortunately, due to my error, it says sexual identity when it should say gender identity throughout, and so that's one of the amendments that we're asking for. We're also, there was a spelling error, and then we had age in one place where it shouldn't have been. After I met with the Multi-Housing Association, they also asked that creed be a protected class because it was in other parts of our ordinance, and so to be consistent, we are asking that creed be part of the housing ordinance as well. The Multi-Housing Association had some questions about other areas. One of them which addressed when housing is built and making it accessible. They thought that maybe that was something that building services could take care of, and that part of the ordinance would be duplicative. So I talked to Ron Bell and asked him, and he said what we had written seemed to be a simplification. It certainly could be done through building services, and so that's why that amendment was made. The Multi-Housing Association also had a question about, under the Fair Housing Act, it talks about the number of units that could be subject to the Fair Housing Act. And currently in our ordinance, we say that if there are 2 units and the landlord lives in one, then we can't say that they are subject to discrimination. The Fair Housing Act talks about 4 units, and that is one of our suggested amendments as well, so that we are consistent with the Fair Housing Act with the 4 units instead of the 2 units, which actually expands the coverage rather than limits it. The other question that they have about the housing is that we intend to add sexual orientation and gender identity there as well, because we think to be consistent. I think we talked to you at the, Bill O'Toole talked to you about it in the personnel ordinances, and I talked to you about it in Chapter 98, that because the city is a federal contractor, we have to follow the executive order, which talks about that federal contractors have to use specific language in employment, and that includes sexual orientation as well as gender identity. We also have to use that same language with subcontractors. And subcontractors and people who have contracts with the city all say that they can't discriminate against anyone, and they have to follow what's stated in Chapter 98. And so we think to have that language, sexual orientation and gender identity, to be consistent, it should be consistent throughout that chapter. And also in Mr. O'Toole's ordinances, he is also including gender identity based on that federal executive order.
Any questions? Clean, basically, as Councilman Jameson is asking, would there be any problem deferring this so that it could go to a committee for further discussion? Or is that going to harm us in any way with HUD as far as being a contractor for them?
We don't have any set deadline that we have to have this done. We were just trying to get it done sooner rather than later to put all of this into place.
Councilor Urfenbach?
I wonder, Mr. Chair, and just kind of spinning out loud here, I'm not sure there's a committee of the council that's appropriate for this, and I wonder if it might be appropriate to defer it a couple of weeks and bring back the revised version to an informational meeting for the council. Might move that process along just a little more quickly and cleanly. Again, just throwing that out there as a possibility. It's not something we have to rush through, but I'm just not sure that taking it into our committee process is appropriate either. So I'd be willing to hear a conversation about that.
Well taken. Councilor Erickson, did you have a?
I did. One of the things that I heard you say is we don't have a definite timeline that we need to get it through. I know
That's
that
correct.
you've said that a couple times. Are we waiting for the federal government to make their changes and adapt their laws first? Or talk to me about that process a little bit.
We are not waiting for that. Right now, because the federal executive order is in place and we need to comply with that. That's really what is rushing us, or that's the deadline. Because that's in place, and it says if you are a contractor with the federal government, you have to have that language with employment, and that includes subcontractors. And obviously the city is a contractor with the federal government. We get a lot of federal money, and so that is our obligation. And so knowing that executive order is out there, we need to make sure that this gets implemented. But as far as the housing things, there is no deadline with our partnership. But we thought this would be an appropriate time, certainly when we are updating the language, to fit with the executive order to do all of it at one time.
Okay,
Councilor Kiley?
Would just like to say that I agree with Councilor Erpenbach that I think the best way to approach this would just to simply be to bring it back to an informational meeting. Because even if we established a new subcommittee or something of that nature, it would still have to come back to the full council for discussion. So if we have a discussion during an informational and we still need more discussion, then we schedule it for yet another informational after that. But it seems like it needs to come before the full council regardless.
Councilor Karski?
Time's not critical, you said, but there is an executive order. Is there other, I believe from what I'm understanding you say, that there is other stuff that is coming that we will have to try to put everything together and get it done at one time. Is there a compliance time to comply with that federal order? What is the timeline? How much time do we have?
I think when an executive order comes out, they expect you to comply immediately with that executive order. And when we look at the possible consequences to not complying, that is where we have concern, because it can be sanctions, it can be losing those federal contracts, losing that kind of money. And so we want to make sure that we can get this done certainly in a timely manner.
But if we're working on it, obviously we are making progress towards that end, correct? Okay.
And I know that when I talked to you before, I talked about the need for us to look at housing in order for us to keep the housing enforcement local, which is what we really want to do. We want to make sure that it is local rather than only at the federal level. But they did not give us a timeline. They just said we needed to have our ordinance be substantially equivalent to what the Fair Housing Act is.
Councilor Erickson?
Sorry, you made another comment. It made me think of another question, so I apologize. When you said the dollars that we could lose, how much is linked to it if we don't make those changes? What are we potentially losing?
And I don't know I'm sorry, I don't know the exact dollar amount. I know there's a number of departments, city departments that get federal funds. My division actually is one of them, and I would guess that I get the least federal funds of any, but we would have the health department and we would have public works and a number of other departments that get federal funding.
And so if we don't do it, we lose all federal funding, or is it only for a specific area, or how does that work?
Well, what it says compliance-wise is if you don't comply with this executive order, one of those things could be sanctions. It could be losing part of the contract or some of the contract, but it doesn't say for sure what it would be. Much like the contracts that we have with the people that we contract with, we say if there's a violation, you might get the money to the part that you've completed, but not any further money with that contract.
All right, that makes sense. And then if I may make a follow-up to the suggestions, a couple people had mentioned delaying it so it can come back a cleaner version. Just throwing it out there, wouldn't you want to just kill it altogether and have a new proposal with all of the amendments already in for a clean version? Just throwing it out there. So then when it does come back to the informational, all these changes on these 3 pages are already in and represented at the informational. It's not really going to do a whole lot with the time. I mean, if you delay it 3 weeks.
By killing it, you mean vote against it?
Yeah, I mean,
just clarification.
Yeah. Just to remove the ordinance and have it go away, and then have it reintroduced in 2 weeks with the new. I don't know if that can be done.
Playing devil's advocate a little bit here, would that send the wrong message to the federal government that we're just totally opposed to any changes versus a delay, which would indicate that we are considering it?
Will they know? Are they watching what we're doing? I mean,
no.
There's cameras
aren't
everywhere.
they
You
always?
Just don't know.
My thought was that it would be, as far as bringing it forward to informational again, it would make sense to do it. I know the 17th is going to be a big day already, but it would make sense to do it after the 17th, because even if we do it next Tuesday, four of our colleagues here will not be here to eventually vote on it. So it makes sense to do it at a time when the new councilor-elects are actually installed or after that. But I would suggest we do it as soon after that so that we can continue on in good faith. And I guess that would be my concern about voting it down this evening that it may not deliver that good faith message.
Councilor Erpenbach?
I have a point of order, but not anybody really that can help me with it, but something to consider. If we kill something, isn't there a period of time that it can't come back? And I don't know what that is. And I'm looking to staff to, and it can come back immediately? It could come back the next week? Because could Jim David come forward, please, to clarify for me instead of trying to,
Sure.
I'm bad with sign language.
One option in your toolbox, it just brings back a memory of the pool rate ordinance. What you did is you deferred it far enough out to give you enough time to come in with a competing proposal so you could send the right message to the federal government by saying you're not killing it. However, you're coming in kind of on the backside and providing an alternative with all those changes, and then you pass it, and then when the deferred measure comes up, you kill it. So you have something in place to point to. However, you are, that might be a cleaner method. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but just an option for you to consider.
Thank you.
Just taking a look at the calendar, if we deferred it to like informational on the 17th? No? Okay, the 24th? Then that would still give the new council a couple weeks to be educated and brought into this, the new council members. Councilor
To
Erpenbach?
Jim's point, the pool ordinance that he's using as the model, we put way out, so maybe we would defer it into June. I would argue, though, that between the 17th and the 24th isn't a whole lot of time as a new council member to digest this entire process. So we might want to look at maybe voting on it the first week of June. Maybe we defer it to the end of June or something, this one, and then the new one comes to us the first of
And
June.
I'm just talking about the informational to start that discussion so that they can start learning on, these changes. So it wouldn't go into a first reading or anything until leadership decided to put that on the agenda.
Okay.
Councilor Karski.
I'm going to try to word this as diplomatically as I can. As an outgoing counselor, to the argument of Councilor Kiley that we could have a new council vote on it, I don't want to shirk my responsibilities or my duties. I'm here for this week and next week yet, and to that argument, we could defer a lot of stuff till the new council comes in. I would ask to defer it because there's just too many working pieces to this puzzle that really need to be looked at and worked on, and it is not an issue of time. It is an issue of doing it right, and I know your group's doing a great job, Clean, but I know that this council and groups in the community have real concerns about what's happening here, and we really need to work on that process a little bit longer, and it needs time. So if I were to defer it would simply be to do it right.
Councilor Jameson.
Just to be sure, I was talking about item 49 and 50. Okay.
Councilor Rolfe.
With that in mind, I would like to suggest then that we move the informational meeting information on this, the presentation, to come on the 24th of this month. And when we defer it, maybe defer it to mid-June, meeting in mid-June. That should give us all enough time to study it and be able to make a decision at that time. And if we want to use the strategy of that Mr. David gave us, we can use that.
I would be in agreement with that. Do we know what's already on the agenda for the 24th? Sounds like a good plan.
All right. Any other comments, questions? Okay. Seeing none, any other items? Thank you, Colleen.
So just so I'm clear, it's on the 24th is when we do an informational, and then sometime later. So nothing at 7 o'clock tonight.
It'll still come up tonight. But
So we need to be here, and it will happen at that time?
But it'll be deferred.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Colleen, if you would, work with Jim David, and he'll get it scheduled for you correctly. Okay. Thank you. Any other items for open discussion at this time? Seeing none, we'll move into the presentations. The first one that we have today is Fleet Study Follow-Up. We will have Tom Huber, Assistant Director of Finance, and Dean Bokart, Business Operations Manager. and Scott Russ, Purchasing Manager.
Good afternoon, City Council. Dean Borkart with the Office of Public Works. Today you will hear from myself and Tom Huber, Assistant Director of Finance, regarding the fleet study recently completed by Mercury Associates Incorporated. Some of you may be asking yourself, why is the Assistant Director of Finance presenting on the fleet study? My answer is simple. This is much more than just a fleet study. This is the roadmap for the citywide fleet centralization of our fleet organization. What does that mean? Well, let's get to that. We hope this presentation explains that. The agenda today is to provide a brief overview of the fleet organization, discuss the objectives of the fleet study, why did we bring in a consulting firm, highlight the fleet study results, and then break those results down into current and future action steps. Fleet management was originally established by the City of Sioux Falls as a division of Public Works to provide for a safe, cost-effective, and productive fleet of equipment and vehicles to our partners. Since its inception, fleet has planned, budgeted, and executed the replacement and maintenance needs for all Public Works divisions. Over time, additional departments begin to use the fleet management for their services, and today we are taking the steps necessary to centralize and consolidate these services across the city to capture efficiencies, control costs, and standardize decision-making criteria. As you can see by the graph above, we have a very diverse fleet, ranging from utility vehicles, grounds equipment, public safety vehicles, trailers, pickups and sedans, heavy trucks, and construction equipment. In addition, we have highly skilled maintenance personnel, ensuring these vehicles and equipment are safe to operate. Our maintenance personnel hold certifications from ASE, Automotive Service Excellence, NFPA, National Fire Protection Association, or EVT, Emergency Vehicle Technicians, which ensure they are qualified to work on this variety of equipment. Very few, if any, shops in the City of Sioux Falls would provide for this work on this diverse of equipment. This graph now shows where the vehicles or equipment are assigned to teams across the City of Sioux Falls. These vehicles are required to support the vital public services executed each and every day. It is important to understand the role these maintenance play ensures the teams above have the equipment necessary to safely and cost-effectively provide the services expected by our customers and our citizens. Even though fleet personnel don't work directly with the public, they certainly have a daily impact. The current City of Sioux Falls maintenance team is made up of 27 individuals from Parks and Recreation, the Police Department, Fire Department, and Fleet Management. These team members truly work behind the scenes, but are vital in day-to-day operations. I would like to take this opportunity to publicly thank them for their efforts. Now to the objectives of the fleet study itself. Mercury Associates Incorporated is a Maryland-based consulting practice that focuses entirely on the management of fleet services. They are the largest and most comprehensive firm in the industry and have worked with hundreds of federal, state, municipal, and private sector fleets. The City of Sioux Falls selected Mercury Associates to lead our review of the fleet organization and operational structure, the fleet facilities and their locations, to evaluate vehicle utilization, preventative maintenance plans, and life cycle management, the parts operation and inventories, the fueling program and potential for use of alternative fuels, the use of technology to complement current and future fleet operations, and fleet funding, chargebacks, and cost recovery. The total cost of the fleet study was $68,400. The central purpose for this evaluation was to examine all aspects of fleet management, the delivery of the services such as maintenance and repairs, and compare these and other elements to known industry best practices. Based upon their recommendations, we have established a priority list of current and future steps. As I stated before, this is the roadmap for the citywide centralization for our fleet organization. We understand the importance and have made this one of the City of Sioux Falls' top 10 projects. This project will impact all city departments, so we developed a fleet advisory team made up of personnel from finance, fire, information technology, parks and recreation, public works, as well as a designated project manager. Advisory team members will provide perspectives, experiences, and talents that will enable the centralized fleet organization to improve operations, foster collaboration, and to increase the satisfaction of all stakeholders. Thank you to all advisory team members for the continued support and commitment to this project. Team, I guess I'd like to take this opportunity for you to stand up. Obviously, you represent your departments, you represent your divisions. If you'd do that for me, please. Thank you. All right, the summary of the fleet study and the recommended first steps. A top priority for the fleet study was to improve the organizational structure. 2 positions were identified, prioritized, and approved with the 2016 budget cycle. The fleet manager will oversee and direct the entire operation. This position is currently in the interview process. Once the fleet manager is hired, and we know the skill sets that this new leader will bring to our team, an additional fleet supervisor will be hired. A total of 4 potential positions were identified in the fleet study. The first 2 positions will be hired in 2016, and any additional position requirements will be evaluated further by management and obviously brought through a future budget cycle to this or a future council. The next priority is to procure a true fleet management information system. In the words of Mercury Associates itself, although simply installing a new software will not be the ultimate cure for managing the fleet more effectively, it is the single most important tool for making many of our recommendations viable. A request for proposal was issued, and 3 proposals were received. The fleet advisory team and maintenance team members from all levels of the organization performed both on-site and remote interviews to determine the best solution for the City of Sioux Falls. Asset Works was selected, and we are asking your support of this agreement in the amount of $257,788 for software and implementation services, and this item will be on tonight's consent agenda. This new software, once installed, will provide us with the data needed to effectively and efficiently manage a centralized fleet operation. At this time, I will turn it over to Tom to complete the remainder of the presentation.
Good afternoon again. Tom Huber with the Finance Office. The first 2 recommendations that Dean spoke about really set the stage for everything else that's to follow. You need to first put the right people in place and the right tools in place, the software in place, in order to really move forward with the remaining recommendations. But to go through those, early on in the process, we've already started this, and we've taken several steps in this direction, as Dean mentioned. The recommendations highlighted the need to stay focused on consolidating and centralizing the fleet, not only to improve services, but to ensure there is a consistent quality of services across all the departments, and to operate as efficiently as possible, reducing the overall cost to the city and the taxpayers. Consolidating and centralizing doesn't mean that everything will be serviced at one location. Currently, we have several other outlying locations besides the central fleet shop, including one at Parks and the fire shop, and some equipment is still serviced at police. But what it does mean is that everyone's going to be using the same software, standardized software across all departments. Work will be organized and overseen by the Fleet Management Division and the team there. And maintenance and replacement of equipment will be further standardized, again, to take advantage of those cost efficiencies that come along with standardization of equipment and processes. We have top-notch personnel across all the departments of the city, and we need to ensure that everyone's is operating equipment that is safe and is well-maintained in providing the best possible services to the public. Having consistent standards that we can measure through the software certainly help to begin this process and ensure that equal attention is given to all the fleet equipment across all departments. After those first steps, one of the next steps would be is to leverage the software to establish some key performance indicators, KPIs, if you will, is an industry term used often. But solidifying the fleet management team, implementing the software, centralizing the operation, again, then set the stage for us to be able to develop these performance metrics to help the fleet to provide an even better service. We'll provide critical decision-making information, as you see on this slide, as to what equipment is available at any given time, or there lengthy downtimes that are having an adverse impact on users, what's the equipment availability, replacement schedules, can we better maximize our equipment, and then our rental and repair chargebacks as accurate as possible, the whole discussion of own versus lease, just a whole host of performance metrics can come out of the software. Another actionable next step that was identified in the study was to leverage the software to improve the parts and inventory operation. Given the amount of equipment and the variety of equipment that is out there in the field for the city, organizing and managing the parts inventory is a monumental task and very important to the overall productivity and efficiency of the fleet. Just the number of parts and the variety of parts. Again, software plays a pivotal role in this piece. And should take a sidebar probably here and say that we did have mechanics, in addition to the team that you see here, and a lot of other personnel from the various departments, we did have mechanics and parts personnel participate in the software demonstrations because a key component of the software needs to be user-friendly, the usability of the software. Good information means good information out, and employees need to be able to access the system quickly and enter the required information so that and not take excess time away from fixing the equipment, but still allows the ability to get good information out of the system. Again, the reward for making some of these improvements will yield some large gains for the city in terms of maximizing our investment in our fleet operation. Beyond the more near-term steps are a couple of future steps that we can take from the report that are longer-term in nature. Will take a little bit longer to implement, but are nonetheless no less important to the overall strategic plan of fleet. First is ensuring that we right-size our fleet to ensure we get the maximum value from every piece of equipment, and that the equipment is meeting the needs of our users. As you noticed at the beginning of the presentation, the city has a diverse fleet, and keeping all the pieces aligned is not an easy job. So having the right software in place will allow us to make better decisions, in addition to having the right management structure in place. Better decisions such as own versus lease for certain equipment, and more effectively manage the life cycle of our equipment, make sure that we're managing when we purchase new equipment, when we surplus the old equipment, taking out of service at the right time to maximize its remaining useful life if it's for resale, or to use it almost to the bitter end. It will certainly help to ensure that the right equipment is available at the right time, which I think one of the results that will yield out of this is we'll be sharing more equipment across various departmental boundaries. We already share a significant amount of equipment, but even more could be shared. Dean mentioned that we have created an advisory team. Most of the team stood up. Input and collaboration from this team, as well as all the users out there, is going to be critically important to ensure we get the most out of every dollar we spend on the equipment, and that we're properly maintaining what we have. One of the last core initiatives that was identified is to more carefully review the facility needs. This includes the configuration, equipment sizing, and eventually completing a more comprehensive review of locations. Space, lighting, and storage were mentioned several times throughout the report, and some of those improvements have already been addressed. We've already completed an improved lighting project and a roof project out at the Fleet campus, as well as a wash bay addition and improvements just getting ready to start. Other facility needs will require further evaluation and study once we work through some of the initial steps that we talked about earlier and have a more complete picture of what Fleet will look like in a few years. Again, it all starts with that initial step of having the right team in the right place at the right time, along with giving them the right tools to make well-informed, consumer-driven decisions. So with that, I hope we've succeeded in at least providing a fairly concise and but thorough summary of the recommendations. Fleet is one of those operations that can often be overlooked, as it provides the behind-the-scenes work that makes sure that everybody else that's providing those direct services to the public have what they need to do their job. It's been a great team effort, and there's no doubt that it'll need to be a continued team effort going forward. There's some big steps that we'll be undertaking, starting with the software, to take a lot of time and a lot of effort by a lot of different people, as well as all the other recommendations that we highlighted. If there's one takeaway that I could leave you with, I think it's this. It's that the team is ready. We have a solid fleet operation today. And as mentioned in the report, we're fortunate to have a highly motivated, hardworking, and competent team in charge of fleet. And this team provides the backdrop from which we can build upon to implement these recommendations. It's a proactive plan to make fleet even stronger, and basically all made possible by what's already in place. So we'd stand by to answer any questions, as well as any of the other team members that are here.
Yep. Thank you very much. Councilor Kiley.
The software, I mean, it's a pretty sizable amount that we're appropriating this evening, $257,788, I believe was the amount that you had mentioned. And basically, I should back up just a little bit. We're now implementing the steps that were identified as a result of the fleet study. So we're in that implementation stage at this point. The software is this new software that was developed specifically to meet the needs of the City of Sioux Falls?
No. This is out-of-the-box software. It's AssetWorks is the company from which we purchased the software. We'll configure it. We'll set it up to meet the needs of the city. So there will be a lot of setup steps, but we'll use the software as it's designed and intended to be used for fleet operation. All the proposals were specific to fleet.
If there is anything that we identified moving forward that we need to update or customize, do we have that ability to do that with the software?
We do, but we try to minimize that because that creates further issues down the road. When you customize and then the software company does an update, then things break in the process. So we will we'll try to use the software as best as straight out as it's designed. There may be some interfaces that will be added. Well, there certainly will be interfaces that will be added. And we may, usually like with the financial software now, we'll go back to the company and ask them to make the changes that we recommend to make their software better. Because this is working in a lot of different places, specifically for fleet. And so our intent is to use it to its fullest.
So if it's a software that's already been produced and it's out of the can, so to speak, is it necessary to have a maintenance contract then, since it's out of the can?
Certainly, because that that's how they improve the software. The maintenance part of the agreements we have with almost all of our software is for the ongoing maintenance that the companies put into the software, and I don't know if they let you buy it without it. You know, I mean, you have to be able to upgrade it. It'll every time they enhance the software, they roll those out. We have to be able to bring those in. And
is it safe to assume that that maintenance contract is lower to us then because there's going to be other users involved with this particular product?
certainly, rather than
Right.
probably developing our
Yeah.
own and having to have somebody specifically updating it. And
Now for the big question, any kind of estimation of what our possible savings that will result from the implementation? And this is maybe a Councilor Staggers question. Sorry if I beat you to the punch, but what do we project would be the savings of implementing all of these steps? Because there is an investment that's going in at the beginning up front. What do we hope to gain moving forward?
You know, obviously to try and predict an actual number. In the initial fleet study, there were examples of right-sizing equipment, the ability to sell certain pieces, to downsize those. You know, you could potentially see money there initially to the tune of, you know, they used an example in the study itself where you could see $50,000 worth of revenue of selling those pieces, but more importantly, you could see over $1 million by not replacing those same pieces of equipment on average that were, you know, some of those pieces were averaging $70,000 to $80,000 a year to replace. So you're talking about the potential to save millions of dollars by getting the key performance indicators, getting a software we can get that information. Now, as to exactly how much will that be and when will it be done, that's a very difficult question to answer, but I can tell you from our review, this 257 for this software implementation and interfaces that we need to get it set up, it was, of the two we shortlisted to, it was the more cost-effective of the two plans that were in place, and it is consistent with what we've seen across other municipalities.
And just one other. In addition to a monetary savings, there is also another benefit in well-maintained, properly maintained at regular intervals, equipment that's been well-maintained at properly intervals. So there's a safety factor involved in that too. Prevention of accidents and the potential prevention of injury accidents as well.
And I would state that, you know, today I believe that we're maintaining it to the best of our ability based upon the software we have to track those items. I don't believe that we have any equipment out there that we're knowledgeable that's not safe to operate. I don't want to give any of that impression today. But yes, better information will provide us the opportunity to provide a better service, more timely service, and make sure that those are hopefully with improved measures, we can extend the life cycles at less cost.
Reduces redundancy
Correct.
within the system. Okay, thank you.
Councilor Jameson.
Thank you, Dean. I can, couple questions. First, let me get seated. Who currently handles kind of the fleet process and management?
Well, the Fleet Street Manager is Galen Huber. Equipment Repair Supervisor is Jeff Layton. So when you talk about on-site day-to-day operations of the city garage, Jeff Layton would be the individual who's there. Jeff reports directly up to Galen. I still handle some of the financial pieces as far as replacement planning of equipment, and we work directly with finance on those. Obviously, we develop those. There are individuals today, like I stated, in fire we have 2 mechanics, in the park shop we have 2 mechanics. So we're spread across with this centralization. All will report up to one fleet manager that will be in charge of the entire operation across the city. Now, like Tom said, that doesn't mean that everybody moves down to the fleet shop at the street campus. It just means everybody would report to, we would have a common software, and we would all use it in the same fashion to get the same information no matter what vehicle we're looking at.
So like Galen, for instance, he should have, and even others are going to have a little more free time on their hand, or at least be relieved of some of the pressures they've been under thus far.
I would say that obviously Galen's direct supervision of the fleet team would be shifted. Obviously, that was added to his responsibilities when the fleet manager position was eliminated earlier.
So anyway, what I see about it is there's all kinds of great things about it. The efficiencies, performance metrics, I think is what you used, is right on. And I know that we could probably get these numbers from our Dave Bixler if we asked, but like, are you going to know now exactly how much money was spent on police cars, how much was spent on fire trucks, and how much was...
We could get you that today. It would just take a lot more time to compile the data out of the software. So ultimately, the answer, yes, it will be much more at the hands of us as well as obviously the city team. That's the most important thing that we can do, is make sure that we have the information. It's readily accessible. It's transparent to the people that are using our service. When I say that, the internal team, so that they can see that information and they understand what it's costing them to maintain their equipment as well. And that will help us in developing better replacement plans across all divisions and all city to make sure that everybody has the piece of equipment they need to do their jobs.
Well, if I could, I see it as just great information as far as like what it really cost to maintain the vehicles out at the landfill, for instance, just picking one of them here. I mean, we really don't have that idea in our head, and it's not itemized, but I can see a report coming in the future that would be just easily pumped out of the software and delivered to us, and perspective would be given to what it really takes to make those divisions run. What I can't help but not think, and I know you guys are going to think the wheels are coming off the train here, but when I saw you go through this, all I could think about was these, first off, the overview of the fleet, these numbers that you had next to these items, what were those numbers referencing? The number of pieces of equipment?
Correct. That highlights the 922 different vehicles, equipment that are across the city of Sioux Falls, yes.
All right, I know. Okay, the wheels are coming off, and I apologize, but the idea is I couldn't help but think of how this software and this whole management, the structure and the way you've done it, could apply so easily to the city in its divisions and departments. So you've got police, fire, engineers, planning, all these guys in different divisions, how many there are, and what it takes to maintain those divisions. And so, you know, like the charges that you are going to make people pay to build up their credits for when they need a replacement vehicle, the same thing for when they argue that they need more staff. And I guess what got me thinking was those performance matrix that you're going to be using, how useful they could be used in other places within the city. And I'll leave it at that. It's just that got my wheels turning, that you're really onto it, and I think this is the structure that we need. I'm glad to see it finally in place.
Thank you.
Councilor Rolfing.
Thank you. I have a number of questions. I hope everyone is enamored with them the way I am. We'll see what happens. Alternative fuels. What did the study say about the use of compressed natural gas or electric, that kind of thing?
One of the statements that they made in the fleet study was that it was difficult to look at alternative fuels. We do use, obviously, 85 ethanol products across the city. But outside of that, there's a significant investment to try and develop compressed gas or something like that. So basically, they said it could be a very difficult first step to try and accomplish looking at alternative fuels. Also, availability was a concern of that yet too. And other, obviously, in many larger cities, they've gone to more of a community access when they do that, where you have access to a plug-in station or something along that lines where they're using electric vehicles. We'll continue to evaluate. We've looked at hybrids. We've looked at some of those. When we evaluate the life cycle of some of those types of alternative vehicles, I I would say that the cost of some of the smaller vehicles that are still using the E85 or flex fuel availability, the cost over the life cycle just has been a cheaper alternative at this point.
Okay. I know I have some constituents that are very high on compressed natural gas, and I'm just wondering if somewhere down the line, we're not going to have to look at biting a bullet and doing it. And if that's, I just am encouraging you to keep that on your radar, because I think somewhere down the line, it might be something we really want to do.
If I had to answer your question, it would be not no, but probably not right now.
Right.
And I think that's both what you're saying as well.
As well. Okay. Can I keep
Continue,
going?
please.
Okay. You mentioned additional shop or something like that. What are you looking at?
You know, at this point, we don't have any facilities on the radar as far as what building would be there. We would invest in our current shops to improve those. Like Tom mentioned, we have already invested in improved lighting. The overhead crane on the main shop down at the Street Fleet campus has been raised to allow a greater height to get some of our bigger pieces of equipment that, safely in to be worked on and maintained. We do have a wash bay, standalone wash bay, a facility that's being built today to better maintain our equipment as far as being able to drive them in, power wash them off, make sure they're getting, cleaned up. So there are investments that are ongoing. I would state that as we look at alternative sites across the city, the biggest opportunity in what their statement is trying to combine, if you're looking at a future site for a different department, combining or potentially going if they have enough equipment. You want the fleet teams to be where the equipment's at, because that's where having them on that same site so they can be maintained. That's one of the best things they stated about the fleet shop at the Street Fleet campus. Obviously, the street division is one of the biggest users. The same thing with parks, having their mechanics at their facility. Their equipment is brought back there on a regular basis. They can maintain it there. So combining future projects with another need would be the way we would be looking. We don't have a 5-year plan. Within the next 5 years, we need a new facility.
Okay. One thing I would strongly suggest to you is that once that flickers in your mind that you're even thinking about that, is to contact the counties and the state to see what's on their mind, and even if they say nothing, they don't want anything, make it available. Tell them this is where we're looking at going. Please come be part of our situation, so that it might just trigger something for them too, and we can do some more cooperation and collaboration.
You bet.
Okay. Will there be any departments that will be on their own under under this new fleet situation?
No. I mean, everybody would, I guess we would look for opportunities still where we could outsource and save money as far as having a specific repair done outside. I mean, I'm not going to tell you that every single repair would be done at the City of Sioux Falls.
I'm talking about a department that has their own fleet.
No.
In other words, police is coming in, fire's coming in, the mayor's going to have his car in there, which he doesn't have, everybody. I'm just kidding. That kind of thing.
Police is in today.
Okay.
The maintenance team report to Jeff Layton, his equipment repair supervisor today. Obviously, all the equipment will be replaced. Yes, the answer is no, there won't be anybody outside of fleet.
And then one last one, will this be something, your software, when you say training people, you're going to train all the way down the line? Because if I can envision this, if the council needs a van or something to take a trip to Pier, and instead of emailing you or whoever and says, hey, we need a van for this date and this date, it'll be all computerized. We'll go in, put the request in there, boom, the computer will assign us a vehicle, and they'll tell us where it is and when we pick it up and all that kind of stuff?
Yes. I mean, ultimately, we do have a motor pool system today. I would say that it's outdated and needs to be improved. But yes, we do have a key valet system included with that. It's called a key valet, so it's, fancy name for motor pool. But yes, it would be able to give you a key, and yes, you could check out a vehicle. You would never have to talk to me or anybody else.
One last thought, and that is that if we're going to Pier sometime, is there any chance we could get an unused police cruiser for that trip?
My answer is we don't even get unused police cruisers. The black and whites that you see, we paint all black before we sell. So the answer is we don't let any black and white.
Just for a couple of days, I mean.
I would
just to
suggest
run up there and back quickly.
You could work with Chief Burns. I'm sure he may or may not be able to meet that request.
I'm positive he
I
would.
cannot meet that request.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Next presentation will be on alcohol licensing, and we'll have Jamie Palmer, our licensing specialist.
Good afternoon, Jamie Palmer with the Licensing Office. I'm here today to give you a brief overview of the alcoholic beverage licensing. The first step in the process of applying for a license is for the applicant to submit a checklist, which is routed to the planning and zoning departments. These departments determine if a conditional or special use permit is required before proceeding. If nothing is required, the alcoholic beverage application and fee are accepted, and the request moves forward to the City Council for action. The item will first appear on the consent agenda as a notice of hearing, and then the Council takes action on the item at the scheduled hearing date. There are 9 different license types that are available in Sioux Falls. The malt beverage with farm wine, and retail wine are on and off sale licenses, which means that you are allowed to consume on the licensed premise, or you may purchase your packaged items to be consumed off the licensed premise. Retail liquor and restaurant retail liquor are on sale licenses only. Packaged malt with farm wine, and packaged liquor are off sale only. State law gives the City Council authority to approve or disapprove an application for a new retail license or the transfer of an existing license, depending on whether the Council deems the applicant a suitable person to hold the license and it is a suitable location. Unfortunately, these terms are not clearly defined. However, per state law, a licensee and managing officers must be of good moral character and never convicted of a felony. Some things to consider for suitable location might be the type of business proposed, if minors will frequent or are employed by the said business, the adequacy of law enforcement to police the location, as well as parking and traffic issues. Besides suitable person and suitable location, state law gives you additional criteria that may be considered if the license request includes video lottery terminals. I won't read through them, but know that they are provided in this presentation for future reference. If the City Council chooses to deny an application based on suitable location, state law mandates that the applicant wait 3 months before applying again, and the location must be different. If denied for any other reason, the applicant must wait 1 year from the date of the denied application before submitting another. The next 2 slides you will find the section of state law regarding restrictions for on-sale liquor and off-sale liquor licenses and the formula that determines the number allowed. The formula for on-sale liquor is 3 licenses for the first 1,000 people and 1 license for each additional 1,500 people after that. The formula for off-sale liquor is 2 licenses for the first 1,000 people and 1 license for each additional 1,500 people after that. On-sale and off-sale licenses are the only 2 types that are restricted by population. Based on the 2010 census data, the city is authorized to issue 105 retail or on-sale licenses, and to date, 104 have been issued. The remaining 1 has been offered and accepted and has no timeline to purchase. On even-numbered years between decennial years, I can do a calculation based on 90% of the population estimate to determine if the city qualifies for additional on-sale licenses. The city is authorized to issue 104 package licenses, and 98 have been issued. There are two things that are unique to the packaged liquor licenses in which they are allowed to offer samples in very specific quantities, and they are required to have some type of physical barrier that separates the distilled spirits from the rest of the establishment. Some applicants have chosen to place the distilled spirits behind the counter or the register, or they place them in glass cabinets that are locked, or they can even have them in a specific area that is fenced off from the rest of the establishment. The confusing part about this is any businesses prior to 2009 do not have to follow this rule, so keep that in mind. Because on-sale liquor licenses are restricted and the city has none to offer, the demand for them is quite high. For that reason, the city must maintain an official waiting list for those wishing to purchase a license. To have your name placed on the list, you must submit an official waiting list application and a $1,500 non-refundable deposit. There are 20 people on this list at this time. Ordinance Section 111.015 outlines this process in very specific detail if you would like more information. This is also the only time in which the city can offer restaurant retail liquor licenses. These licenses come with mandatory reporting requirements in which they have to prove that 60% of their sales comes from food and non-alcoholic beverages. Special one-day licenses can be requested by current license holders or by civic, charitable, educational, fraternal, or veterans organizations. These can be requested almost anywhere in the city limits. The cost for a one-day malt beverage license is $25 per day, a one-day wine is $25 per day, and a one-day liquor is $100 per day and $50 for each additional day. Any of these requests cannot exceed 15 consecutive days. A consume but not sell permission can be granted in facilities that are either publicly owned or in facilities owned by a nonprofit organization. This is simply a letter of request that is placed on a consent agenda, and no sales of any form can be made of the alcoholic beverages if this permission is granted. There are two renewal periods for the license types that we offer in Sioux Falls: retail beer, beer with farm wine, packaged beer, and packaged beer with farm wine are renewed in the spring because they are valid from July 1 to June 30th each year. Retail liquor, restaurant retail liquor, retail wine, and packaged liquor are renewed in the fall because they are valid January 1st through December 31st each year. Renewals that have not had underage sale convictions in the past 12 months are approved on the consent agenda by exhibit. I have provided a small example of what information is provided to you on the exhibits, which is if there are video lottery terminals, owner's name, business name, address, and the conviction history for the previous 5 years. Licenses with underage sale convictions in the past 12 months are required by ordinance to submit a security management plan with the renewal paperwork. A hearing date is scheduled, and the licensee is notified by mail to be present at this hearing so they can speak to the circumstances of the violation and explain any corrective action that they have taken to assure that another violation does not occur. This slide gives an example of a security management plan, as well as it outlines the section of ordinance that mandates that they provide that plan. Lastly, I would like to give you a brief explanation regarding revocation, suspension of an alcoholic beverage license. According to state law, no license can be revoked or suspended due to an underage violation if the violation was committed by an employee or agent of the licensee, and if the licensee hasn't had more than 2 violations in the previous 24 months. The second paragraph goes on to explain the penalties and fines that can be imposed by the South Dakota Department of Revenue. The City Council's authority in suspension and revocation is the ability to make a recommendation to suspend and revoke, and the reason must be relevant to alcoholic beverage control. This can only occur after a notice has been mailed to the licensee at least 30 days prior to the hearing date. The notice must be published in the newspaper at least 1 week prior to the hearing date, and a hearing must be held. That was a lot of information that I covered in a very short amount of time, but I hope it was helpful. I want to acknowledge Keith Allenstein, Assistant City Attorney, who is my first contact when questions require his legal expertise. I also rely heavily on those in the South Dakota Department of Revenue Special Taxes Office. If I can't answer your questions, they surely can. So I'd welcome any questions.
Councilor Kiley.
I'm just curious, why is there a difference of one between on-sale licenses that we can offer and off-sale licenses? It's on-sale is 105 and off-sale is 104. What's the difference in the formula of that?
Honestly, I don't know, other than that's how it's set by state law.
Okay.
You get 2 instead of 3, automatically for the first 1,000.
And is the number of licenses that a municipality is granted or can issue, is that based, is it based on the 10-year census then?
Yes. And like I said, in between the decennial census years, on even numbered years, I can do a calculation based on 90% of that estimate and to see if we qualify for any additional in between those 10 years. But typically it's the 10 years.
There are provisions for a rapidly growing community then. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from the council? Councilor Karski.
Couple questions. First of all, the on-sale fee, isn't that set by statute at like 187.5 or something like that?
It's in our ordinance, and it's 192,360.
Some random number, okay. I see the retail liquor on sale, it says one offered accepted at 155,000, no timeline to purchase. What's the difference between that, or why the discrepancy?
Well, there was an ordinance change, and I'm not sure even the year, but it did change after that license had been offered and accepted at that reduced, or that set price at that time, which was 155,000. And at that time, they had no timeline, or they were not forced to make any decisions as to when they were going to purchase and put it into place. Now we do have something specific in ordinance that determines you have, 45 days to decide on the location, you have 45 days to determine if a conditional use permit, those types of things, so that they have a set time frame that they have to purchase the license and to get it in place.
So somebody's sitting out there with an offer and acceptance. Was there any money exchanged?
No, they have not purchased it.
But they have the right to that for 155,000 in perpetuity?
Yes.
Oh, well, that's an interesting investment by somebody. They get to hold on to something forever without spending any money, and they can buy it for 155 and turn around and sell it for $200,000. That's interesting.
Excuse me, Councilor Jamison.
Oh, thank you. Jamie, I've been here a few years, and you were assistant clerk back in the old days, and you seem to have embraced this new role very well, and you've got it all under your belt. Congratulations to you. This is like the first time I think I've ever seen a report about this whole program from start to finish that I can remember. I remember pieces of it from different places and things, but I mean, I wish I would have read that years ago, but I think I get it all. But you've done a fine job of taking over that position. I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you.
And then one other question on the concept of the compliance checks that are done. Where is that stated that, how is that authorized? How is that organized? I mean, who decides whether we do or we don't do a compliance check on the whole administration of that, I guess?
I believe I'm going to let Keith Allenstein touch on that, because
Okay.
that is out of my realm.
The only reason I bring it up is of all the years, the heartburn that we've had on these issues generally has been with those compliance checks that have come back with failures, and our frustration with our inability to do anything. And I was leaning over talking to Councilor Kiley about opportunities for laws to be changed, but I probably have failed to appreciate the power and strength of the lobbyist on this liquor issues in Pierre. But it seems like there's a lot of opportunity here for changes, but I'm just trying to get back to our frustration level has been on those compliance checks determining that somebody's doing underage, but we can't do a thing about it. I'm just remind me, how do we even have that authority and control?
To do the compliance checks themselves? Keith Allenstein, City Attorney's Office. I could be mistaken. I haven't looked at this. I don't think there's any statutory authority to do that. I mean, the police department sets forth the policy. They check certain areas during the year and try to make sure that they hit all of basically the off sale. But as far as authority to do that, I mean, they have the authority to do any kind of a compliance or sting that they choose to do. But they've set forth the policy so that they have it set out so that all of the on sale or off sale, places are checked throughout the year. If they have issues at one, they get a little bit, they don't necessarily wait till a year has passed or anything like that. And it's not a year to the date. Obviously, the idea with those is to the person not to know that they're coming. Otherwise, if everybody knows you're coming, then it certainly helps with their compliance. But so if there is a failure, then they get bumped up and they'll be checked more frequently.
If I could, with the group, the interesting part that I found in this discussion was that the state provides funding for compliance checks on tobacco use at all locations throughout the state. And I don't know exactly who is contracted to do those compliance checks, but it isn't police officers. And I think the idea of having our police officers or detectives, I think they are, going around and doing these compliance checks, maybe an item that is just, those guys are doing an important job, but there's also a lot of other important jobs for them to be doing, and we're not receiving any compensation from the state to enforce their laws that we have no authority to revoke except recommendations that we can give. And that's just some of my trying to put this all together that doesn't make sense, and I just needed to understand some of the fundamentals of it to make sure I had it. But really the discretion is up to, if I understand it, the mayor couldn't direct officers to do the compliance check, or he could say don't do that anymore. And we all think it's a pretty valuable service, but I think perhaps the state should have a bigger role in this. And I'm not saying, I'm just saying.
Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. Just piggybacking off of what you were just saying, that we really don't have any authority. We actually do, and we've been in contact with the Department of Revenue quite a bit lately, that if there is a compliance check that is failed or a smoking violation, we as a council do have the authority to deny based on suitable location, suitable person, and that is a lot of authority. However, we say, thanks for playing, now come back next year if we deny. So we don't have the ability to say, sorry, you got to close your doors for a week. We're going to wait a week. It's sorry, come back next year, which is a little excessive in my opinion to do that. But we can deny based on suitable person, suitable location, and it's pretty clear in state law. We just have never exercised that authority up to this point. And they have done the smoking compliance checks as well that can go into play, and we've asked people to come and be before us if they've had that. So just wanted to make a brief comment on that. I have a question for Jamie. First of all, thank you for being here. I know we talked about having you come in front of Public Services. Instead, we decided to come here so everyone can hear all the same information, because we do this so often, and oftentimes we just kind of roll with it and just move through it so quickly. So thanks for the information. My question kind of comes off of Councilor Karski's question with this license sitting there. So if I purchase, and it sparked a question, if I purchase the license for that $192,360 and I'm sitting on it, but now you want to open a business, do I have a limit, or can I say, okay, Jamie, if you really want to open this restaurant, it's going to be $500,000? Do I have a level, or is it whatever the value is between you and I? Or is there a maximum limit on what I can transfer and sell that, or am I not understanding that right?
No, the city doesn't get involved with private transfers or transfer sales. We don't require that they report to us how much they're selling their license for to an entity. If they happen to provide it, I mean, that they certainly could, but they are not required to do so. All that happens is if, like for instance, I just got a call or a question today about there was apparently a question about a bar closing today, and they wondered if I had known and if I had any information. Well, I don't, but typically what happens is when an applicant has a license and they are wanting to sell it, they have to come see me to start the transfer paperwork process. An affidavit of bulk sale has to be signed by the current owner, and the new owner that's going to be taking over has to fill out an alcoholic beverage application to start that process. And then it moves forward to the city council for transfer, and it has to go on two agendas like it normally does.
So is it generally speaking, is it usually if I'm closing my business, I kind of have somebody that's going to come in and buy it. It just doesn't get turned back into the state to that person on the wait list?
Right, yeah.
You don't have to technically go to the wait list. They
Right.
can just sell it to Joe Blow for whatever amount
Right.
at whatever restaurant.
And most of the time if a business closes, they probably do have something in the works. It's just that there is no definite timeline that they have to get that done. Well, I shouldn't say definite, but because their current license is valid for them through the end of the year, December 31st. So they would have from now until December 31st to do whatever they needed to do to transfer it and then renew it for the next year.
Councilor Erpenbach?
Thank you. Thank you, Jamie. I echo Councilor Jamison. It's been fun to watch you roll into this job and to take on the responsibility. And we're just pleased to see you in this position. I have a question that it might be Keith that answers it, but I want you to hear it because you've kind of you've helped me try to understand this a little more clearly. And so I think I just want to make sure I'm articulating this correctly. When we look at, it's your 5th slide, the additional criteria set forth by the statute 427A 64. Item 2 is the proximity of the business to other establishments licensed for video lottery. One of the things that I've heard not only from you but from the Department of Revenue and others is that it's easier to deny an application in the first place than it is to go into and revoke an application that's been in for however long a period of time. Can you talk about what does that location look like? I mean, you said very clearly that it's not very clearly defined, but can you give us some thoughts about how that might look? What might be too close? Or do we have examples? I mean, that's why I'm saying, Keith, are there examples in other places in South Dakota maybe where they have looked at this statute and said, yeah, that's too close, you're out?
Now by
Right.
Close, you mean next to another facility or?
Right, and Councilor Erickson just suggested, are there other places that maybe you can only have one facility per block, or you can only have one every half mile, or are there are any other communities addressing that in any way? You don't know,
I'm not sure if there have been any that deny. I can try to get that information before the 7 o'clock. But going to your question about it's easier to deny, note that these criteria that you have here is for a new, not for transfers. So you cannot take these criteria or a renewal. So once you take these things into consideration the first time, then these criteria are out.
Right, and so if I might, Mr. Chair, just a couple of thoughts on that. One is that we know as a council that, or at least I've heard personally from the people, especially in the central part of the community, that there have been too many alcohol licenses of varying kinds, video lottery, whatever, too many issued in too small an area and in several places in the Central District. And I won't point those out. You know them by just driving by them. There are some places where they're door to door to door to door, separate casinos strung out, and they create all kinds of issues for those neighborhoods. My question then, and the other piece of that historical thing then is that there was a time when a previous city council said, you know what, you're not going to have video lottery within X number of feet of a park. You're not going to have it within X number of feet of a school. You're not going to have it in certain areas, right? Yeah, Councilor Karski, or Councilor Staggers was on that council at that time. And that got knocked down, correct, by the Supreme Court. Is that right? Keith Allenstein is nodding his head at me. So that is all lead up to this question of, I want to talk about how do we really have power? I mean, Councilor Erickson is right. We're sort of given some limits here, or some broad, but we really don't have anything when it comes to location in particular. Sorry, it's not a question. It's a help me out here. I've got to understand this.
Okay. The ordinance in question that was struck down is because it was an ordinance that we passed that pertained only to, it was a zoning ordinance, basically.
It was a zoning ordinance.
Zoning ordinance. It was struck down by the South Dakota Supreme Court because even though it was classified by us as a zoning ordinance, because it only pertained to establishments with video lottery, the State Department of Revenue, as well as Mr. Law and his attorneys, argued that it was a video lottery regulation, which has been preempted by the state, and therefore the cities cannot regulate video lottery. The South Dakota Supreme Court agreed that because that doesn't matter what you call it, doesn't matter if you're home rule charter, whatever else, if the way that they interpreted that ordinance, it was a regulation on video lottery and therefore invalid because the state preempts that. This statute here under 42.7A64 is one of the few areas, and that's one of the things that the case discusses, is that this is one of the few areas where the cities are allowed to treat video lottery differently. This is a grant of power from the state that takes it out of that preemption. So they've given us this power to take these additional criteria into consideration.
Continue.
But so the particular piece of that I'm looking at, and if it's on the screen too, it might help people that are trying to follow my rabbit hole, I apologize, is that it has relation to other businesses licensed for video lottery. That if we believe as a council that the businesses that are licensed for video lottery, which includes alcohol, because alcohol and video lottery are tied together in South Dakota, if we believe they're too close together, we can say, nope, they need to be farther apart. They need to be only one on a block, or whatever it is we decide they are. Is that what that says?
Yeah, that's one of the additional criteria for just on sale with video lottery for a new license. And as I said, I'm not sure if they're, I will, before tonight's meeting, see if I can find, based upon either this or any of the other criteria, what I can find as far as any case law that suggests this is okay and this is not. I don't know that there's any out there.
I think that would be very helpful. I mean, the citizens, at least that speak to me about this kind of stuff, are watching us when it comes to these new licenses and how close we put them together. They don't want us to repeat the mistakes that have been made in the past. They don't want their neighborhoods filled with casinos and places to liquor, all these liquor licenses. I am hearing people say, we don't want you to do that again. And so I want us to just be very cognizant of how this council behaves when it comes to granting new licenses. Thanks for the help.
Councilor Karski.
I have a question, but to follow up with Councilor Erpenbach's thought process there, I mean, it would be arbitrary and capricious to say you can, but you can't, unless there's some specific standard on how close they are. I mean, how do you say to one, well, you're too close to that one, and the next guy, well, yeah, but you're not. I mean, what standard exists? So that's an interesting question.
Right. I don't disagree with that at all.
Yeah, yeah. My question, let's start out with a comment first. Alcohol is controlled with a very strong hand by our state. I mean, they set most of the rules. They tell us what we can and we cannot do. And then we're expected to follow those rules, but we're kind of the ones that are supposed to make sure that those rules are followed, I guess, would be the best way to say it, by our local licensing. My question is, we grant, side-by-side licenses to a lottery place. Came up to me this last week. Who enforces, once that license is granted, on what activities are happening within there, kind of going back to the, not from Councilor Jameson's perspective about who you're selling to, but are you still following the rules that you said you would follow when you got your license? Who back checks that? And who has the authority? I mean, is that our code enforcement? Is that you, Jamie? You want a badge? I mean, I don't know.
Unfortunately, that's a very difficult question that has come up time and again. A lot of the confusion comes in that there's so many different working parts of it. Often before an alcoholic beverage license comes to you, it's gone through the Planning Commission to get a conditional use permit. So that's one working part. And then the council is a working part. They also request video lottery, that's another working part. They may have requested to be a tobacco retailer outlet. So that's another working part. So there's so many different things that can be involved with one license that it doesn't become very clear as to who has authority to do what. But I would say that anytime I get calls or questions or complaints about certain businesses, my first call would obviously be to Keith to say, is there something that we can do on a local level? If not, then I reach out to the State Department of Revenue, and if it's not their area, they sometimes refer me to lottery to find out what we would need to do. And it would be my belief that if there was something that someone saw in a facility that maybe was, if they knew, most people don't know, that something might be a violation of a video lottery rule, but if they knew, of course, you could call my office and then I would refer them on to the video lottery to check out. But it would be my belief that it's a video lottery issue, that the video lottery folks, you would have to investigate that. If that answers your question.
So if somebody has a complaint against a business because of the way they're operating, if it involves video lottery, it should go to the Lottery Commission. If it involves alcohol, it goes to
the South Dakota Department of Revenue folks in Pierre would, especially when it's a license that's already in place. And new licenses is the City Council. I mean, you have the ultimate authority at the new license at the beginning of it. But once the license is already in place and then there are issues, it becomes very, very difficult to, one, be able to do anything about it and to find the right department to refer it to.
And thank you. I think that's the point I was trying to make, is we have all these rules and laws and regulations and ordinances and statutes, and once you get the license, we're kind of trusting that you're going to follow them. And if you don't, oh my. Yeah.
Councilor Rolfing.
A couple of things just kind of to follow up with that. We've been frustrated around here for the 6 years I've been around that, people miss a compliance check once a year, once every year. You never twice, but at least once a year, that kind of thing, and there's nothing that we can do. What would happen if we denied the reapplication with the because that then would go to peer, correct? With the recommendation that they shut them down for 1 day or a week. Would it be something that wouldn't shut them down immediately until the state worked on it? But if we kept doing that, would they finally get the idea that we want to have, a slap on the wrist? Or would they just say, forget it, you're not getting anything?
Are you talking about starting the recommendation process to the state for locations that have failed? Is that what you're... Well, and that slide I should bring up, there are specific criteria set by state law that says, they can't be recommended or revoked or suspended. And I would believe that that would also mean that you probably couldn't recommend within, unless they have had more than 2 violations within that 24-month history. So I would think that certainly if they did meet those 2 criteria, you would be within your rights to do so.
Well, yeah, we understand that, but that rarely happens. And so my idea has always been that we put a conditional use permit on every liquor license that we do, and devise some kind of a regulation with a CUP that we can then come down, and under that regulation, we can maybe do a day or something that they would be forced to shut down. So that's something to think about. I know Keith is probably working on it, and or somebody is, and we'll see what happens.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, and in the research of my presentation here, I reached out to Lori Hogstead, who has been very instrumental in me learning this role. She's forwarded some previous accounts of revocation, and some of the revocation that has been done with the conditional use permit, which allows the alcohol licenses in some cases. Now that with the Shape Places ordinance, a lot of places aren't required to go through that conditional use permit process, but that was how some of those previously were revoked or denied on that level because of the conditional use permit was revoked.
Councilor Kiley.
Keith, earlier, I picked up on a statement that you had made that we're referencing new licenses, issuance of new licenses versus transfers. What's the difference in the process? I mean, if a transfer is taking place, does it go through a similar process with us authorization, the acceptability of the individual or business that would be on the receiving end of that transfer?
Yeah, the only difference I was talking about is the criteria for the on sale with video lottery is those additional criteria you can only take into consideration for a new application, not transfers or renewals. But for all transfers and renewals, you can still do the suitable person, suitable location.
Could you repeat that, please? I didn't hear all that.
I'm sorry. So what's on the screen now is what I was referring to as far as those additional criteria for on sale with video lottery. State statute allows us to take 6 additional criteria into consideration for new only. If it's a renewal or a transfer, you cannot use those additional criteria, but you still always can, whether it be for on sale with video lottery or any other license, do the suitable person, suitable location for a transfer, renewal, or new license.
So going back to Councilor Urbanbach's concern about the density of these businesses within a confined area, that would still be something that you could consider then?
On a new only.
On new only. So the transfer, we would have no way of denying that, even though there's one on every house number on the block.
You would be limited to a suitable person, suitable location. So if you can, you could maybe make that into a suitable location argument, but you cannot use these additional 6 criteria for a transfer or renewal.
Thank you.
Councilor Jamison.
Keith, hang on. I think you said it right there. The may use that as an argument, and I think that's exactly what happened. I'm pretty sure we're talking about that undue concentration occurred is by that same transfer. All of a sudden, how do you deny it when somebody next door is doing the same business? What would be your reason for denying it when they're doing it? And I think one other question trying to solve this issue that's been brought up, which is a fair argument, is what is the definition for a nuisance? What is it that, how do you define a public nuisance? If say one of these businesses, any business in town, had an enormous number of police calls all year, and other businesses would have none, of course, but some have a tremendous number of police calls, or just what would be a way to label something as a public nuisance?
Well, alcohol violations are a way to define something as a public nuisance.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to look at all the criteria, but there can be public nuisance and private nuisance, just interfering with the peace and enjoyment of land and things like that. But there are specifics as to alcohol nuisances.
Could you get that definition? I think there's a potential for opportunity if we are trying to find solutions, and that might be an angle there. If somehow somebody has met a criteria for public nuisance, then what authorities do we have in fixing that? I guess could be an angle. I'm just looking. I'm fishing like you guys. Thanks, Keith.
Can I say one small thing, just to follow up?
Okay, we got one, I'm gonna have to cut it short here, because we do have other business.
Yep, one statement to Councilor Jameson. I, as a matter of fact, sit on a subcommittee with the county, and there is several representatives, police, attorneys, state's attorneys, et cetera, and we are researching public nuisance crimes and what that looks like. So we've only met a short just a few times. It's an ad hoc of the pretrial task force that I'm on as well, and that is an area that I was asked to sit on. We have not done a lot at this point, but it is something that we're looking at. What can we do, or our hands tied with state law? So.
All right. Councilor Rolfing, I've got to cut it short.
Might I add one thing, personal privilege?
Oh, excuse me. I did say yes to that, so please.
No, just quickly, I wanted to wish Councilor Rolfing and Erpenbach happy birthday this week, and to acknowledge they are both older than me, so.
By minutes, Councilor Karski. Happy birthday to you as well.
I can't say that, but, okay.
All right. Councilor Rolfing,
Yes,
please.
I would move that we go into executive session pertaining to personnel matters pursuant to South Dakota Codified Law 1-25-21.
Do I get a second on that? Okay. With that, we will move into executive session. We'll have to ask the room be cleared, please. And thank you for all that have attended and watched on TV also.
Yeah, I mean, we have about, what, 3 newly elected council members. I was wondering if anybody had any thought of allowing them to sit in on this too.
No. I don't think they're sworn in yet. I don't believe they can sit in on it. So I would say no, sir.
Oh, okay. Okay.